Imagine, just for a second, standing at the absolute edge of the world. The air is so incredibly thin that every single breath feels like drawing in shards of glass. The temperature is violently cold. I mean, it literally seeps right into your bones. And all around you, just this vast, suffocating silence. Today, we're dropping straight into the icy, terrifying reality of Mount Everest's deadliest altitudes. We are going to explore this truly chilling story of two climbers and unpack the devastating science of exactly what happens to the human mind and body when pushed way, way beyond the limits of survival.
Did you hear that? Felt like someone calling my name. That right there is a direct quote from a climber named Samir. He was just standing near base camp as the sun began to set. It's a pretty terrifying thought, right? You're miles and miles away from civilization, completely surrounded by nothing but rock and ice, and yet you hear a whisper. This sets up a really profound mystery that we'll be unraveling in this explainer today. When climbers report ghosts, voices, and apparitions up on the slopes of Everest, is the mountain actually haunted, or is something far more terrifying happening inside human physiology? Okay, let's dive into Section 1, Entering the Death Zone. To really understand how our climbers, Ajay and Samir, ended up in a literal fight for their lives, we have to look at their path. Their journey kicked off at the Namche Bazaar base camp. It's a place that actually looks almost magical in the evening light. But from there, they began an absolutely grueling, week-long ascent. They were battling thinning air, bone-chilling temperatures, all the way up until they hit the notorious Camp 4. Now, it's important to know Ajay and Samir were not total novices. They had successfully tackled a bunch of treks together before, from Kasol to Kedarkantha. But as they were about to find out the hard way, those were basically just hills. Everest is an entirely different beast. You know, extreme environments have this funny way of amplifying our core traits. On one side of this dynamic, we have Ajay. He's overconfident, pretty dismissive of the risks, and even goes so far as to joke about the ghosts of fallen climbers. But on the other side, we have Samir. He is highly anxious, deeply respectful of the mountain's tragic history, and he's already experiencing early auditory hallucinations. It's this intense clash between human hubris and primal, raw fear. To really grasp Samir's fear, we need to define exactly where they are right now. They're entering the death zone. This is the ultra-high altitude region above 8,000 meters where there simply isn't enough oxygen to keep a human alive. Time essentially stops up here. Because of the extreme cold, frozen bodies never decompose. So Samir was absolutely terrified by the reality that they were literally climbing through a graveyard. Perfectly preserved bodies, some still in the exact clothes they died in, act as grim, frozen landmarks for the living climbers passing by. Which brings us to Section 2, the price of obsession. This overwhelming desire to conquer the mountains starts to fatally override their basic survival instincts. Right at Camp 4. They're tucked inside their tent, totally freezing and exhausted, when Ajay decides to make a fatal, obsessive push. He tells Samir, "We have come this far, why stop? Let's go a little higher, where people usually hesitate." Despite Samir desperately warning him that they were practically inviting death, Ajay's ambition completely blinds him. He wants the glory of the summit so incredibly badly that he completely ignores the lethal reality of oxygen deprivation. And, tragically, he convinces Samir to break their own safety rules. Just think about the catastrophic risks they were actively deciding to ignore here. Near-zero oxygen levels, bone-chilling, unthinkable temperatures, the constant, looming threat of sudden weather changes, and perhaps most tragically of all, they ignored a specific safety promise they'd made to each other, to turn back at the absolute first sign of trouble. They were basically setting the stage for an inevitable disaster. Moving on to Section 3, Trapped in the Whiteout. As they push beyond Camp 4, the mountain just violently turns against them. The clear, starry night totally vanishes, and it's replaced by sheer fury. They are slammed by a sudden whiteout. If you don't know, a whiteout is this severe weather condition where blowing snow and dense clouds completely wipe out all visibility. The whole environment turns into a blinding, disorienting white void. The wind was hitting them like literal daggers. And here's the craziest part. Even though Ajay and Samir were walking maybe 2 feet apart, this whiteout rendered them completely invisible to one another. Right in the middle of this blinding chaos, visceral horror strikes.
Samir's foot slips on the ice. He ends up dangling over the edge, desperately calling out, "Samir, hold my hand. I can't see anything. Please save me, brother. I don't want to die." Ajay reaches out into the void, but the wind is just too violent. Their hands miss each other. An entire sheet of ice gives way beneath them, and both men tumble uncontrollably down the steep, rocky slope, plunging straight into a dark, icy cave. That takes us to Section 4. Encounter with green boots. Miraculously, they actually survive the fall, but now they've landed in pitch black, freezing isolation. They're trying to conserve what little oxygen they have left when the wind suddenly uncovers a truly terrifying sight. Just feet away from them lies a very specific, chilling landmark. It's a pair of neon green boots attached to a perfectly preserved frozen corpse. By a horrific stroke of bad luck, they have landed right next to the legendary fallen climber known as Green Boots. It is the exact nightmare Samir had feared right from the start. Now, what's really fascinating about this moment is how the story pivots from your typical ghost story into an intense medical deconstruction. Ajay starts staring at the corpse. He begins to fully panic, claiming the dead man is moving. He says its neck bones are cracking and that it's staring right at him from deep eye sockets. So what's really happening here? Was it actually a ghost or just the mind's final trick?
Ajay genuinely hears the corpse speak to him. He claims it says, "See how cold my feet are. Will you wear my boots? They are still like new." He's screaming that the corpse is trying to pull him in, that it wants him to sleep in the snow so the pain will finally end. It's a scene of absolute paralyzing terror. But as observers looking at the science of this, what should we really be taking away from this horrifying moment? Let's break it down in Section 5, the science of freezing.
To really understand what Ajay was experiencing in that cave, we have to look at the brutal, step-by-step reality of severe hypothermia and hypoxia. First off, the extreme cold drastically drops your body's core temperature. Second, that near-zero oxygen environment literally starves the brain. Third, because the brain is suffocating, it completely loses the ability to distinguish between reality and illusion. This is the hypoxic stage, where these vivid, terrifying hallucinations kick in. And finally, the lungs just stop pulling in air entirely, and the limbs turn blue and freeze solid. Ajay's hands were literally turning blue while his brain was fabricating this entire horror show right before he froze. So here's the absolute crucial takeaway. We're dealing with an unreliable narrator. Those whispered voices? They weren't spirits at all. They were the terrifying byproduct of a hypoxic brain shutting down. There were zero external ghosts in that cave. The real monster was the brutal physiological breakdown caused by the mountain's extreme, unforgiving environment. Ajay's mind was simply creating a narrative to try and make sense of its own death. And that brings us to our final section, a monument of ice. As Ajay ultimately succumbs to the cold, his friend Samir is trapped right there beside him. Having tried absolutely everything to save his friend, Samir eventually loses feeling in his own hands. As the deadly storm passes and the moonlight finally returns, Samir just rests his head on Ajay's shoulder and slips into the exact same frozen fade. It reflects this incredibly profound and tragic realization from the source material. We think we conquer mountains, but we are just figures of clay that nature can put to sleep whenever it wants. It just perfectly captures the sheer hubris of humanity, trying to conquer a place that is really meant only for the dead. Ultimately, Ajay and Samir became permanent parts of the mountain. So I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. The next time you hear a chilling ghost story whispered down from the world's highest peaks, will you blame wandering spirits, or will you look to the terrifying fragility of the human mind under pressure? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious, stay safe, and as always, keep learning.